Hello, everyone. I will now present a brief overview of the film Unforgiven. Enjoy your viewing. Ruth Slater gains her freedom after 20 years behind bars for committing a serious crime. She is met by her guardian, Vincent, who gives her advice on what actions to avoid to not return to prison. He emphasizes the importance of staying away from the family of her victim, as it might awaken some people's conscience. Ruth tries to find someone while a man watches her. Vincent offers her a job at a fish factory if other options fail. Meanwhile, young Catherine gets into an accident, falling asleep at the wheel. Her foster parents arrive at the hospital and offer her to live with them temporarily for recovery. Ruth ends up in Chinatown, where Vincent leaves her near a hostel full of society's outcasts. She is to share a living space with 3 tormented neighbors, which seems worse to her than a prison cell. The son of the man Ruth killed turns out to be her stalker. Keith consults with his brother Steve about the possibility of punishing Ruth, but Steve convinces him to not rush. Mrs. Malcolm suspects that the stress from her older sister's release could have caused Catherine's accident. The couple hopes Catherine will not seek out Ruth, as it is forbidden for her. When Ruth receives a phone call, someone on the other end calls her a cop killer.
Cop killer.
Upon returning, she finds one of her neighbors rummaging through her things and punishes her. An addict ruins Ruth's only photo with her sister. Keith lives with his sick mother. Steve has a wife and a small child. Ruth recalls the circumstances of the crime. They were about to be evicted, and when a sheriff entered the house, Ruth shot him with a rifle. Another family now lives in that house. Ruth finds it difficult to be among people, especially in the noisy and crowded New York. She is denied a job as a welder and ends up working at a fish factory where conditions are harsh and smelly. Most workers are migrants or former inmates. Her colleague Blake offers her a ride, but she refuses. In the hostel, only 10 minutes are allotted for the shower, and the next resident is already waiting impatiently for her turn.
Drag your bitch ass out next time!
Ruth goes to the library to find her sister through the internet, browsing adoption sites. She finds her photos and learns that the house was sold. Liz gets nervous seeing a stranger in the yard. Ruth remembers that the sheriff was their father's friend and offered the girls temporary shelter. He wanted a peaceful resolution, unlike the aggressive crowd. John approaches Ruth, and she lies about renovating their house. The man offers her to come in. Ruth remembers living there with her sister and how the sheriff was killed. Hearing children's voices, she panics and runs away. John offers her a ride, and Ruth learns he is a lawyer. She seeks a family law specialist. John convinces Ruth to be honest and tell the truth about her past. Ruth confesses that after their parents died, they lived in that house, and she received no replies to her letters to her sister in prison. Now, she wants to meet Kate. John is moved by her story and offers help. Kate suffers from insomnia and refuses pills, which interferes with her piano playing. She remembers childhood nightmares and a stranger woman. Ruth can't get a construction job, so she starts working at a homeless center for minimum wage. She now has 2 jobs. Vincent advises her to confess her past to her boss. Cop killer is a label that will follow her for life. At the factory, Ruth and Blake start to communicate, and she agrees to go with him. Blake is surprised when Ruth gets out in a troubled neighborhood. This becomes not only her job, but also her new home. Ruth moves her belongings, and now Keith knows where to find her. She hears noise and, armed with a key, goes to investigate. She almost attacks Blake, who brought her donuts.
What are you doing?
I called your name. I didn't hear anything, so I just...
Blake brings Ruth a warm jacket, noticing her old one was worn out. Ruth is surprised by such attention and can't believe someone cares about her. Puzzled, Blake apologizes for his sudden appearance and leaves. After John learns the reason for Ruth's incarceration, he stops answering her calls. Ruth leaves him voicemails daily, hoping for help. Steve's wife spends time with his brother. A police friend informs Steve that Keith continues to be interested in Ruth's whereabouts, prompting Steve to talk to Keith. Their family was left homeless after their father's death when their mother started drinking. The older brother remembers those hard times better. Now, with the murderer free, he also starts thinking about revenge. Liz reproaches her husband for letting Ruth into their house. Eventually, the lawyer takes on her case after persistent requests, and his wife demands that Ruth no longer approach their house. After a long time, Steve visits his mother, but she turns away from him. Then Steve decides to take a look at the person who destroyed their family and pretends to be a builder to get inside. Ruth notices his strange behavior and asks him to leave the building. Steve pretends to leave, but stays and starts searching through Ruth's things. He finds an old photo of Kate and a letter to her sister. He takes pictures of them. Vincent, learning about the hiring of a lawyer, advises Ruth to give up searching for her sister, possibly because she fears Ruth and therefore does not respond to her letters. After work, Ruth invites Blake over, and they become close. Mr. Malcolm receives a letter from Ruth's lawyer, shocking him and his wife. Steve shares with his brother that he met Ruth, and she seems to be doing well, which he thinks is unfair. They decide to take revenge on Ruth through her sister. Unlike Ruth, Blake is the life of the party, sociable, and enjoys every moment. Ruth realizes it's time to tell Blake the truth about herself.
Shut up. Why would you say that?
After revealing that she spent 20 years in prison for killing a sheriff, Blake was disturbed, but didn't try to stop Ruth when she left the cafe. Unlike his wife, Mr. Malcolm was calm about the possibility of Ruth getting close to Kate, confident it would bring nothing good. But Mrs. Malcolm was open to the idea of giving Ruth a second chance and suggested talking to her at least, which their daughter Emily witnessed. At the fish factory, Ruth was attacked and beaten by a colleague whose father was a policeman, and the girl decided to take revenge for the cop killer. Ruth suspected Blake had spread the information about her past. After a quarrel, her phone broke, and she refused to communicate with Blake, demanding to be left alone. Meetings with Vincent occurred regularly, every week. Lawyer John reported that Kate's foster parents agreed to a meeting, so Ruth needed to prepare. Kate couldn't shake off memories of the tragic events that happened 20 years ago. Before meeting Kate's foster parents, Ruth concealed her bruises and showed up to their place. Mr. Malcolm insisted that Kate awaited a stable and promising future, which shouldn't be risked. He claimed Kate didn't remember Ruth as her older sister, which angered Ruth, who had raised Kate since her birth. Ruth accused them of possibly destroying all the letters she sent to Kate over the years. She insisted on meeting her sister, but the lawyer informed her he could no longer help. The letters, however, were found by Emily, who began reading them one by one. Unable to cope with feelings of anger and helplessness, Ruth began to destroy the community center she had built with her hands. Despite everything, Blake managed to convince Ruth to listen to him. He confessed he had also been in prison and was released just a year and a half ago, meaning their association could result in returning to jail. He assured her he hadn't spread rumors about her, apologized for his reaction in the cafe, and left. In the evening, Emily contacted Ruth and offered to meet. During their meeting in the park, Emily revealed that Kate sometimes remembers something about the past. Before leaving, Emily informed Ruth about the location of Kate's rehearsal, giving Ruth a chance to see her sister. Steve followed Emily and learned her address. At home, he witnessed his son's tantrum, while his wife entertained herself with his brother. After putting his son to bed, he beat up his brother, and his wife defended herself, using the baby as a shield. In his mother's house, Steve found his father's old gun. Before going to the meeting, Ruth wanted to talk to the lawyer, but he wasn't at work, so she headed to her old home. There was no John, so Ruth asked Liz to come out to her. Liz didn't see Ruth as deserving a second chance, but Ruth's tears moved her, and she gave Ruth a chance to explain. Ruth revealed that on the day of the tragedy, it was Kate, not her, who took the gun and accidentally killed the sheriff. Learning the truth, Liz decided to help Ruth. As a result of the recoil from the shot, Kate damaged her nose. After this event, the older sister took her to a roadside cafe. That was their last meeting before Ruth decided to surrender to the authorities. She assured her younger sister of her unchanging love, regardless of the circumstances. When Ruth approached the Philharmonic building, Steve called her and threatened that he had Kate at gunpoint, with female sobs audible. He provided the address where Ruth was to arrive. Ruth once again turned to Liz for a ride. Steve was holding the hostage in an abandoned building near a quarry. Liz, realizing the seriousness of the situation, called the police. Entering the gray building, Ruth saw that Steve was pointing the gun not at Kate, but at Emily. Having mistaken the sisters, Kate was at rehearsal, as planned. The criminal forced Ruth to lie on the floor, preparing to kill Emily before her eyes. Ruth realized who was in front of her and understood his motives, remembering the day the sheriff talked about his children and the offer to move in with them. She tried to persuade Steve to abandon his plan, saying it would not bring him relief. Steve, unable to hold back tears, fell to the floor, but still held the weapon in his hands. When special forces appeared around the building, Ruth helped Emily stand up and protected her with her body. Emily went outside, while Ruth remembered how Kate had taken her away from the window, not wanting her to see her arrest. Coming out again with her hands raised in front of the police, Ruth this time was protecting not only herself but also Steve, who did not shoot. Both were detained and handcuffed. Vincent arrived at the scene and convinced the police to release Ruth. Nearby, at the ambulance, stood the Malcolms along with the younger sister. Vincent signaled to Ruth, and Kate herself approached her for a hug. Thus, after 2 decades, the sisters were reunited.